Hi guys, so we're back with the Traxxas UDR Unlimited Desert Racer. Now we took it out one of our new dusty locations and the rear wheels, or the whole transmission, locked up. I think it's something in the rear. Ironically, now when we brought it back, it actually is turning, but literally when we were out in the field, it literally just locked up. So I suspect what's probably happened is in the rear transmission, in there, we've probably broken off one of the gears. So we're going to do a strip down of the gearbox and see what we've got. Hopefully should be a relatively straightforward repair. So we'll turn it over and we'll start stripping it down. Now we've got the car upside down, and for once I haven't got to remove the body shell, which I'm glad of. Don't really like removing that. You get the hang of it, but there's a few bolts to take off. It's not the easiest things to remove. But before we go on to there, we'll just show you, these are the 3D stand. This is the 3D printed stand, which the car was just sitting on. It's got a recess in there for the rear prop shaft or drive shaft, whatever you want to call it. Can do those. If you want one of those, if you follow RC 3D Prints on Facebook, or I will leave a link in the description. Similarly, we've got a tool stand there, which we can customise to all your needs. It's got all my tools that we're going to use for this rebuild, or certainly most of them anyway. So here is the car. We have given it a bit of a dust off, or a clean, with a bit of compressed air, paintbrush, just to remove the worst of the dirt from around the areas that we're going to be opening it up on. The reason for that is because when you're opening up all these parts, you don't want any of the dust or anything to get in there. It needs to be super clean then when we rebuild it, so just prevent some of the dirt getting in. However, I have noticed a problem on this prop shaft here. This little grub, or this shoulder screw, I can't think what you call them now, looks like it's actually snapped off because there's no head to it. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to remove that. We really do need to remove that to get to the gearbox. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove the rear axle. We'll probably remove the prop shaft from the front, and we'll then see where we get to. Okay, so we've now got the truck upside down. I've given it a bit of a clean just to remove the worst of the dirt, and we will now start with removing the rear axle. Now, I have not got the brake calipers fitted on mine because I just don't like them. I've also got alloy drive hexes, and as you can see, in actual fact, that one there is bent pretty well. So if we'd have had the caliper on, that would have fouled. Now, one of the things you can notice, actually the transmission was turning quite well there, so not really sure what the problem is. But what I'm also going to do to remove these, I'm just going to put these nuts back on, and I just need to knock that. Make sure you put the nut on and don't knock the end of the shaft. Then these should pop straight off. We'll do the same on the other side. Now, as you'll see, that one didn't come off very well. It hasn't actually come off. I think because it's bent, it may be wedged on there. So I'm not going to force that. I'm going to take the axle off without doing that. So what we're going to do, we're going to undo the bolts for the bottom rear trailing arms, the bolts underneath here for holding these on, which are the top arms. You've then got the straps to remove, which are around the front here, and then the roll bars. Now, ordinarily, if you're able to get that undone, which you should be able to, this would then be the axle off. But because I've got that problem there, I'm actually going to undo it from that end and hopefully slide it off from that way. And one of the things I have noticed, there's quite a lot of play in that axle. So I wonder if we might have got a problem with the bearing in there, but we'll see. So I'm now going to hopefully just be able to just try and get that off. Unfortunately, to get that off, I just need to remove this battery retaining part. So that's off. And then we have, and famously, that should just pull off there, but it isn't. So either that somehow has got very well stuck on there. So what we're going to do now, well, we could strip it down with it like this, but it's going to be difficult for you guys to see on camera, so I'm actually going to do another stage. I'm actually going to take out the centre transmission. So that means we're going to undo all these and get down to this centre transmission so we can just take the whole shaft out. This then removes, you don't need to remove that. It comes off like that. So we're now, this is the centre transmission, if anyone's not seen it. So we've got to now remove this first disc cover here, which enables the motor to be removed. It's just 2 screws for this bit. This is the same point, you need to remove all this to get to your servo if you want to replace your servo. See, that's where your motor mesh is in. So to remove the motor, you've got 3 bolts there. They are different lengths, so make sure you don't mix them up. I'm going to take them off. You see, you've got 2 shorter ones, which go over there and there, and then a longer one into there. Make sure you don't get them mixed up, and then the motor lifts out, and as you'll see there's a locating pin there which meshes your gear into the spur gear, so you don't need to worry about that, and it then locates into there. So it's quite straightforward removing the motor, but we need to remove this bit here. So we've got a few, and we have to remove this because there's a screw hiding under there. You can see screw there. So I say normally you wouldn't need to do all this to get to your rear axle. It's just mine, as you'll find, you get a lot of problems with these trucks. So we've got all those bolts are loose. They are varying lengths, so keep an eye on what went where. That one's not fully undone. Put that back in there so I know what went where. And here is spur gear. That's the front planetary gear system, and this is your rear sliding system. So I should, there we go. And I now have my axle ready to work on. Now normally, if that undone, you wouldn't have done all that, but that's the nature of the beast. So here we have our axle on the table. Let's strip it down then and see what we've got. First things first, I'm going to remove the metal skid plate. Then we remove these 2 screws at each side to remove the bearing, then the axle pulls all the way through. Right, so there is one of the axles. That end looks pretty good, as does that. The bearing. Well, we actually need to remove the pin to get to the bearing. Bearing feels silky smooth, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Now again, that looks fine. We have got the issue whereby we can't get this off, so okay, so just a little bit more force, I'm just using the vise. We've managed to get that out, and the bearing's okay on that one as well. So now we are going to separate the diff. There's a variety of screws. There's, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4 there. And then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, another 4 the other side screws there. So we can take all them off, and then we'll be able to basically open the whole rear axle up. And so here, basically it just pulls out like that. And now I'm expecting we might see a teeth or two missing. Well, that actually doesn't look too bad. The pinion gear in there, I can't really see that very well. It looks a little bit warm, but I can't see anything obvious missing, so I wonder what's going on. What we're going to do, we're going to open up this bit here now so we can actually get all the way into the gearbox. So, those 4 screws are out. Fortunately, all these screws are all the same length. And here is our gearbox. So here, oh, that's slightly loose. So if you can see that. Okay, this is the first time I've opened up this one since we've actually had this car. You see those bolts there go into there, so should put a little bit of thread lock on them, so that's obviously not going to help, but that looks okay, nothing obvious. Let's have a look at these cases. Any debris in there? Well, there's a good amount of, not a massive amount of grease. Can't see anything too bad. Bearings. That bearing feels okay. That bearing feels okay. Alright, what about this gear? Yeah, that's got a fair amount of wear in it, but nothing broken off it. Well, nearly. Yeah, they're pretty chunked. So we'll be replacing that. Wonder about the planetary gear system. So we'll have this to pieces. So to get this to bits, there's just 4 screws in there. So we've got those 4 screws out, and if we pull out the, we can see what's happening. It's pretty dry in there, but I don't know if you can see that bearing on the end of there is completely disintegrated, so that's the problem with that. See, the bearing should be in there, so obviously what's happened is the remains of that bearing are probably somewhere in there. Yes, you can even see a ball there. God knows where the cage has gone for it. That must be completely disintegrated. So we're going to have to replace that bearing, probably this moulding. We're going to check these gears, check that gear, check these mouldings, check there's no cracks in them or any deformation in them, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to turn the camera off now and give all this stuff a meticulous clean. Some of it I'll reuse, some of it I won't. I don't know if I've got any spare plastic mouldings. I think I might have a new axle, but I think we'll probably reuse that one. But we need to make sure that it's really clean, because all this grease in here will no doubt have small amounts of fine metal particles in it, because obviously these bits have to go somewhere, and if you just rebuild it with those in there, it's just like a grinding paste and it will not last any time at all. So I'm going to clean everything on this table up. I might even have a look at this just to see if I can get this off. I don't know if we can. We'll have to have a look at that, and then we'll go from there. So we've given everything a thorough degrease and a really good clean up. I actually used some really hot soapy water to get rid of the grime after I degreased it. You need to make sure that everything is thoroughly dry though, because you don't need a degreaser remaining either, because when you re-grease things it just won't take. We've had a quick look at the plastic parts. They seem, they're worn. Sorry, they're marked from when we've hit things and that, but actually, in fact, can't see any damage on any of the plastic parts. So I'm not going to replace any of those. The ring gear or the rear diff gear, as we can see, that is got wear on it, so I'm going to replace those bits. I've got some new parts of those, so I'm going to replace those. The other parts, there we go, replacement parts for that, which we will fit shortly. Now, the planetary gears, remember this is where this bearing failed, and what I think's happened is it's due to heat. As you can see, that actually moves about in there now, the outer shell of that bearing. So I think if anyone knows these cars, these props get very hot. The heat, I think, is transferred into that bearing. The bearing's overheated and seized up, then basically it's failed. Now, I've got a new outer housing for it. I haven't got any other parts that I'm going to replace. If you can see these gears, I don't know if you can see, there is some slight marks on these. I think when the balls have come out of the bearings, basically that's where it's locked up. Now, if I had spares of these, I probably would replace them. If this was a car or a truck that I race competitively, these will go straight in the bin. But as it's only a bit of a hobby truck, we're going to rebuild it, see if it works. If they last another, dozen runs, then that's fine. I think that won't be too bad. So what I'm actually going to do, first thing I'm going to do, we're going to rebuild the planetary system. I'm going to do it dry before we put any grease on it, just to see that it all feels okay. I have got some replacement bearings. These are the bearings that blew apart. And I have replacement housings. Obviously, I can only use one at the moment because at the moment I haven't worked out how I'm going to get this apart. So we're just going to replace this one, which is where the bearings failed. So we'll get that together. I'm going to put it together dry, no grease on it to start with, and just see how it feels. So we have our new planetary gear components, new bearing to go in. We don't need this part. And this is the old one. We've removed the bearings, have come out. I've just given them a feel and they feel fine. This part here we're not going to need anymore. So I'm just going to put the 5 bearings in there. Make sure they seat properly. Quite straightforward. Bearing in the middle. And then we'll put the gears around the side. Put the ring gear on there. We'll just have a little feel. Actually feels quite good. Feels okay. So normally put some grease in this, but I'm just going to assemble it. Certainly dry just to start with. So that's on there. We'll nip the screws up. 4 screws that go in there. So all those 4 screws are done up. This gearbox is dry. All the gears on here are dry. Let's just see what that feels like. Any notches, any clicking? No, that feels okay. So as we know, the little gears in there are not brilliant, but they're certainly good enough for this. So I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do now, I'm just going to remove those screws and we're going to put some grease in there. So what grease do you use? Well, that is, to be fair, one of the $1,000,000 questions. You can get some very expensive proper RC stuff, but it's only coming from the same place as what a lot of automotive stuff does. As long as you get a good quality, high temperature compatible grease, it should be fine. Because don't forget, this does get very hot, so you don't want something that's going to melt and go like liquid, which I have seen some people use. So I'm going to get some grease, put that in there, and not be afraid to use too much. Now this is the stuff I'm going to use. It's got high melting point, that's the most important thing. Now it is an automotive grease, but I actually know for a fact that a lot of the RC stuff that you get is just this stuff repackaged. So we're going to use a copious amounts of this, pack it into there. And now we will reassemble it. So that's all done up. I feel that feels a little bit tighter now because we've obviously got all that grease in there. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to wipe away some of the excess around there because we don't need too much around there. That just will go everywhere. So that is then the planetary gear system done, and we will then come on to rebuilding the ring gear or the rear diff gear. So here we have the components for the rear drive gear, diff gear. It's not really a diff, it's a spool, whatever you want to call it. As you can see, this gear didn't actually look too bad. That's pretty worn, but if you replace one without the other, I think that's a false economy. So I'm going to just chuck those, and we're going to use a new set. They're not particularly expensive in the greater scheme of things. Here are the new ones. Always worth just checking. There's no obvious manufacturing defects on there. Shouldn't be. Quality of product is pretty good now, but always worth a check, and they look fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the black insert which goes into there. You don't get this as a replacement, so make sure you don't throw that away with your old gear. Then you have to put on this part which goes in there like that. Now, I don't know if you remember, when I took the other one apart, these bolts were actually a little loose. So what I'm going to do is put a small amount of thread lock on them. 2mm hex. I always use blue thread lock or Loctite. Loctite's actually the brand name rather than the product. But if you do use a different one, if you can get red, but red is actually designed to not come undone, whereas you do want to get these undone, because again, this is a part that you don't get with your diff gear, and that shouldn't have any problems without wearing. So we just put these four in. So those four are now in, and as I said, we put thread lock on there. Where you have metal into metal, it's always a good idea to put thread lock on. I'm just going to try the bearings now, just see if they are a good fit and how they all feel. Yep, they feel fine. And on this side, you have this black bush again. That doesn't come with the diff gear. That goes on like that. That's all good. Pinion gear will go on there like that, and that's just a simple fit onto there. Again, bearing on there, simple fit onto there. Now, this goes obviously on here like that, and you can't, just to show you, you can't get these the wrong way round. It will only go into this housing one way. If I try and put it in that way, it won't go. It has to go in that way. So that way, if you put it in if you could get it in the wrong way, your front wheels will be going forward and your rear wheels will be going backwards. So it's a little, that's why that part of the plastic's in there. So we know this goes in like that. This moulding is actually universal, so it does go top or bottom. I can see that that's my bottom because it's more worn. So we'll just take that off there. And then we will slide the planetary gear in there like that. Get that the right way around. I'm just going to check to see how that feels before I put any more grease on there. I know what's happened. Got the bearing. That bearing there needs to move back. It sits in there. It sits right at the back of that housing. I'd got it in that gap there. So that if your housing doesn't go together, that's what you've done wrong there. And it should just literally pop together like that. That's together. Now, I'm going to have a little feel of what that feels like. That feels pretty good. Happy with that. I mean, it should do because they're all new parts. The bearings are fine. There's no issues with the housing. So again, what I'm going to do, grease that up well. Same grease as what I used on the other. It's not very pretty, but it'll do the job. You can actually grease it up after you've put the gearbox together, but you can't get quite to the little pinion gear. So that on there. Really not afraid to use too much grease on this. I've got oodles of grease. There we go. So I'm now going to screw this back together. Got 4 screw holes to go in there. All the screws are the same size for this, and also when it then goes into that housing there. In fact, we can, if we want, put that into there now. And there's actually our gearbox almost back together. And then we'll put the screws through. 4 there, and then there's about 8 on there. And then we have one rear axle back together. Give that feel. That feels nice and smooth. It's now basically just a case of the reversal of what we showed earlier on, how to put all the bits back on it and put it back in the car. I will show it, but it is just a basic reversal of what we just did. You'll see I did use an electric screwdriver, have it set on the lowest torque settings, and I always then use a hand tool just to torque them up so I can feel how tight they are, because it's very easy to over tighten. So we've just got a few of the ancillary bits to put on the axle. These are just like those strengthening parts which go on here. You need to put them on before you put these parts on, because they actually go on and hold that together over there. Now I'm only going to use one screw on here because that one goes with the strengthening, or the gearbox protector part. So we'll just put that on there. So that onto there. Again, don't over tighten any of these parts because the threads aren't the best. That bit in there. And then that one. No, I've done that wrong. The axle's going before these bits because they're the bearing holders. So here are our axles, bearings. Now you just need to turn them so you feel them locate. Bearing goes in like that, and you want to do the other one because they actually push each other in and out. Now what you can also do, I didn't do it, you can seal these connections just with a bit of grease, just to keep the grease out. Keep the dirt and grime out, but I haven't bothered with that. So that then just goes over kind of the wheel nut on, like that. Put the wheel nut on so I don't lose it. Wheel nut on, sorry, the bearing holder there. These, my next job, I've got to just straighten them out. You see they're pretty well bent, so that will be another job. I'll do that towards the end. I'll get everything back on the car. Just gonna put those nuts on there, and then you've got 4 screws. What are they, 12mm, which just go through the back of there and there. We've now got this gearbox protector. Now I did have a problem where it actually bent up, as you can possibly see. So it actually caught on the stone and bent all the way up there. So I'm actually going to make sure that's bent nicely down. Put that on there. And then bend that a little bit more, just so it's really tucked down there. You can see, because what actually happened was some got stuck on there and it bent it all the way up. So that's good. We'll just fix that on. The way this particular one goes on, we have a small washer underneath which spaces it out, and then for all my, I put them in the wrong holes, so these need to swap into those holes because they go into there. Now these will go on here. There we have one axle ready to go back on the car. And so there we are. There is one repaired rear axle. I've just put the pins in the rear shafts, and then we'll just put the wheels on, nuts back on, cover on underneath, and she's good to go. And we'll be taking her out a little bit later to check it's all working. If you liked that video, please do subscribe, like and share, and leave a comment of some other videos you'd like us to do. Thank you very much for watching.